Hi guys, at last. I was wanting to go live now. I thought I would use my phone for a change because the stream might work better. It really wasn't working. So here I am. We're going to look at Iran. I've got the chart up here and we're going to talk about what's going on, what I think is cooking there. So this chart for Iran, just to say there's two charts for Iran. One is from the 1st of February 79 when Khameni, not to be confused with Khameni, the son, returned. And here on April the 1st, 1979 was when the Islamic State was declared. The Islamic State of Iran was declared by Khomeini, and that was on, like I say, April 1st, 1979 at 2:30 p.m. I got this chart from Astrology King. I really like it. It works well for me. We have a Leo ascendant with Jupiter just there in the 12th house, which is quite interesting. And right up there, we have a midheaven in Taurus, and it's on 10 degrees of Taurus. And transiting Uranus is heading for that, which is really interesting. I wrote down a whole lot of these other transits when I did Iran's chart, and I was going to do it last year, but I never ended up doing it. So I did at my on January the 1st, 2019, when I did my New Year's Eve predictions. I talked a little bit about Iran, and I said I didn't think there was going to be a conflict coming because back then it was on the cards as well for a different set of circumstances. So when I've looked back at the chart, because back in 2003, I did the chart for Iraq, and I thought, well, this is going to be a disaster. And the chart for Iraq in 2003, the chart for Libya back in, was it 2012, around then, when Libya was basically crashed into a basket case country again. The chart then was absolutely categorical. There were so many transits. There were so many solar arcs. There was lots of Pluto. There was lots of destruction and violence in the chart. So it wasn't difficult for me to see that it was going to be a disaster. With Iran, it's very, very different. We can see some change coming, but it's certainly nothing to do with going to war and all-out explosion. So what do I think about Iran? I'll come back to what I'm seeing with the transits in a second. But the first thing I'd like to say about Iran is that while I don't think this necessarily is going to precipitate a conflict like we've seen before, I do think it might precipitate knock-on effects with terrorism. Now, I know that the Pentagon said that they weren't at all afraid of sleeper cells. I think that is probably a little bit too early to say, because when I do my chart, as is going to be coming in a few days, Jupiter in Capricorn, and I look back at the kind of themes you see with Jupiter Capricorn, one of the very clear things you see is terrorism. Every time Jupiter was in Capricorn, there was a lot of attacks. There were often hijackings, aircraft hijackings. Now, while I don't necessarily think we'll return to aircraft hijackings because things have moved on in terms of security, that doesn't really happen anymore, I do think that it might be likely that there are attacks on aircraft, or I wouldn't, unfortunately, I wouldn't put it past a passenger jet possibly being, well, I don't suppose they could possibly shoot at it on purpose, but on purpose by accident, something involving an aircraft. I wouldn't rule that out, because with Jupiter in Capricorn, that was quite common. Attacks on aircraft with hijackings and that. What else was interesting about when Jupiter was in Capricorn is it was that incident outside the Iranian embassy in London when Yvonne Fletcher was shot. People will remember that. And it was also the 1972 Olympic Games when there was the attack on the Olympic athletes from Israel. So there are themes going back to Jupiter in Capricorn when you see things going on with terrorism possibly sponsored by Iran. So I wouldn't rule out attacks in that vein. I do kind of see this regime as being bullies. They will bully their own people, as I'm going to be talking about, because there were a lot of protests going on in Iran in November 2019. So they'll bully their own people, but like all bullies, they back down when they're confronted by a bigger bully, in this case, America. And so I don't think that they'll go head to head or toe to toe. In terms of their nuclear ambitions, and I'm saying that they're quitting the nuclear deal now and they're going to start refinement, I think from the chart that was happening anyway. And I did actually say that last year, that I didn't feel that they'd ever stop their nuclear program, and I felt they were stepping their nuclear program up going back to last year. So I don't think they were really keeping to that agreement anyway. So let's look at the first thing, which I think is quite interesting, where we have solar arc Jupiter, which is over here right at the end of Cancer. It's already crossed the ascendant. It's going to be conjuncting Saturn in the second house this year. So I look back to see when Jupiter had conjuncted the ascendant That was in 1997, which I'm going to talk about now. And at the same time, when Jupiter was conjuncting the ascendant by solar arc, Uranus, which was in Aquarius, was squaring up to the midheaven here in Taurus. As I said at the beginning of this vlog, Uranus and Taurus is now going to be conjuncting this year the midheaven, which I think signifies a change in leadership and a more progressive leadership. So back in 97, Rafsanjani was succeeded by a moderate reformist called Muhammad Khatami, and he was actually unsuccessful at making Iran more free and more democratic. But there was at least moves in that direction, and they had a more progressive leader. So because the symbols now are very similar to 1997 when he came in, I think this year there will be a change in leadership. It's based on internal pressures and external pressures. Internal pressures, discussing in the second half of this broadcast. Hi, Pamela. Obama was useless with Iran, yeah, as with most things. He wasn't interested in America at all. He was a globalist, wasn't he? And and external pressure being put on by Trump. So what do we know about Iran? Well, first of all, it's a very young country. It's one of the youngest countries in the world in terms of their percentage population under 30. It's also a very educated, sophisticated youth. If we think about Iran, it's not like other Arab countries. It has a very long history. The Persian Empire was extremely sophisticated, successful. I mean, they were the inventors of chess. They gave a lot of their sort of early technology to India. They were advanced in mathematics and astronomy. If you guys ever watched my vlog where I looked at the origins of Christianity and the religion of Islam in terms of planetary placements, and I said that the three wise men, as depicted in the Bible, were actually Persian or Zoroastrian astrologers, and they understood the significance of the great conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn in Pisces, and that was actually the star they followed. So looking back, they've got a sophisticated past that goes long, predates their more Islamic kind of past, and also as early as 1979 when the Shah was overthrown. Prior to that, in the 60s, it was a very progressive place. So they don't really need to become progressive, they just need to recapture it. And I think that there's a spirit amongst the youth that are ready for that. You know, as soon as you've got an educated youth, university educated, highly intelligent country like that, there is a limit of time in which this whole theocracy can be sustained. I mean, as you see in most Western countries, people do move more towards atheism and away from they want a greater separation of church and state, should we say that, as people can become more sophisticated. So other than that transit, which I was talking about, the other interesting ones is we have solar arc Saturn is conjuncting Pluto in the third house, which is very significant in terms of the crackdown of communications and the current regime seeking to become more and more controlling in terms of the internet, which we're going to talk about later. That's signified. We have Neptune, which is in the fifth house, representing young people. Neptune, particularly synonymous with young people and being in the fifth house. That's solar arced to be opposite Jupiter. Jupiter in the 12th, the sleeping giant. Jupiter, a restlessness, a desire for freedom, just bubbling under the surface. Also, what Jupiter activated in the 12th says to me is the changes are going to really, the important changes will come internally. So the threat to the government is the enemy within, which is the young people, as represented by Uranus in the fifth, now moving to oppose Jupiter in the 12th. What we also have is solar arc Sun, which their sun is placed in the ninth, which is quite relevant. Ninth, the house of religion, quite relevant for theocracy, that their ruling planet, the sun, should be in the ninth. That's moving to oppose Uranus in the fourth house, Uranus in Scorpio in the fourth. So that definitely tells me a bubbling up among the people, a discontent, rebelliousness, revolution bubbling up. Now, I don't think we're going to see anything very dramatic in Iran, but I definitely think changes are afoot. And I think America is involved. Really, they're doing a lot of aggravation propaganda or agitation propaganda to try and they understand that there's already a yearning for change. There are already problems within Iran because of the economy, and America see the time is right, not only for the strike on Soleimani, but also to continue the agitation propaganda within to bring this regime down. I said to you, one of the reasons I think that America want to bring Iran down, I think they would, going forward, rather have closer relations with Iran. I realize Iran's always been a big buddy of Russia. and Iran are a big buddy of China. But that whole key region, in terms of Zabinski Braginu, he said that on terms of the grand chessboard, that area, as well as Azerbaijan and Georgia, was key to controlling global politics, particularly with Iran doing the Silk Route, the Belt and Road, which I talked about on my China broadcast. I think America feel they strongly need an influence in Iran to kind of watch what China is doing and to maybe put the brakes on what China are doing in terms of this new Silk Route, which could be a way of China broadening their control. So I do want to look at the chart of Saudi Arabia because I feel these two go together. I think America is almost fed up with the Saudi regime and would prefer to have closer relations with Iran. So I think there's a joint maneuver here where America are trying to change things in Iran so they can get closer to a more amenable Iran. And I think at the same time, America are trying to bring a lot of changes in Saudi Arabia and to weaken Saudi Arabia. So I think up until now, America have always wanted a strong Saudi Arabia to counterbalance Iran. But I feel the American foreign policy, I don't know if it's because of Trump or beyond that, is changing. So they now want to shift their focus to be better buddies with Iran and possibly be less buddies, should we call it? I don't know, less friendly with Saudi Arabia, and they would want to weaken Saudi Arabia going forward. Right, this is my opinion. I don't know if you guys would agree with that or not. So we've talked about Iran and that there's could be a youthquake there with all these young people looking to reject these old fogies in the kind of current regime. So I think events, which I'm going to be talking about that were happening internally in November, emboldened Trump to take this action against Soleimani because the Iranian Republican Guard, of which Soleimani is head, not particularly popular with the young people because they cracked down so heavily on the protests that happened in Iran in November. And a lot of people were killed, which was kind of covered up. So here is Soleimani. He was poor. He came from the farms. He cut his teeth, so to speak, in the Iran-Iraq war, where he kind of won his colors. From there, he moved up in the Iranian Republican Guard. He's kind of a threat, in a way, to Khameni, because unlike Khameni is not as bright, not as powerful, not as kind of strong as his father. And in a weird sort of way, America has done Khameni a favor by taking out Soleimani because he would have been the number two, kind of a big threat. He could have also been driving things forward and almost intimidating Khameni. And a lot of people, even Jeremy Hunt said, for example, let me tell you, Jeremy Hunt said that there was a hardcore of radicals who were actually responsible for the violence in Syria, in Iraq. And this was down to a very powerful Soleimani. So Soleimani has been increasing his power. That makes making Khameni very nervous about his own position. So in a way, this has done Khameni a little bit of a favor. So as I say, I think in a way Iran have needed this external crisis in order to galvanize the country. A little bit of siege mentality where they realized that things were getting really shaky and unstable and the public was getting, people from all strata of Iranian life were beginning to feel this regime lacked credibility. But with this strike, they can now kind of point to Trump as the big Satan and try and divert from the internal crisis, creating a siege mentality. So that'll work in the short run. But in the long run, I do think this regime is now, it's on shaky ground. So something interesting that wasn't mentioned is Japan, key ally of America. Prior to the strike against Soleimani, America arranged with Japan, I don't know if arranged is the right word, but we'll call it arranged with Japan, to have some of their warships in the Gulf. This is a key signal to China. So Japan was very ruthless in the previous century. This century, they've been very restrained. Well, ever since World War II, they've been very restrained, but they still are a particularly ruthless and also a reliable ally, as Abe is very good, has very good relations with Trump. So he's kind of brought these, Abe has sent these Japanese warships into the Gulf there near Iran, just to send a subtle message to China. You can see all the chess pieces being arranged here. I know, other than Lavrov, Russia's been fairly quiet on this whole thing, and rumors are that Putin knew that the strike was going to happen, and he's kind of stood down there. So as I was going to say, I think Iran have been enriching uranium anyway, and that's why I think that Trump thought this is now time to go for it. Yes, okay. And as I say, I think America going forward would prefer an amenable regime in Iran that would be a better partner than Saudi Arabia. I think they're beginning to think Saudi Arabia have had their day. And look, let's think about it. At one stage, Saddam Hussein was their big go-to person. I mean, they booted him. At another stage in Egypt, it was Mubarak, who was a big ally of America, or almost a puppet, you could call it. These puppets that the United States have in the Middle East, they outlive their usefulness. And I just feel from the chart that Saudi Arabia have outlived their usefulness, and America are looking to kind of push them aside, as I said, take on Iran instead. So in 1953, America were involved in kind of ushering in a new regime in Iran. Then again in 1979, they got rid of the Shah, which only took 2 days. So it can happen very quickly in Iran, a total change in regime. I think we're due another one. I really do. So let's talk about what was going on internally in Iran, because I just think what was going on internally has what's emboldened Trump to take this move. So on the 15th of November in Iran, there was a 300% increase in petrol prices. I'd just like to acknowledge this stage, the academic agent. I did have a look at his channel and I gleaned some of these facts from there. Apparently his father wrote a paper. Hi Lisa, hi Cameron, hi Pamela, hi James. It's Saudi Arabia who will create a problem to Iran. I can see trouble there. I'm not quite sure exactly what's going to happen between obviously Saudi Arabia, who funding ISIS. There's something really strange going on there, but things change very quickly in the Middle East, don't they? So back to Iran in November last year, there were protests, and they started out peacefully, but the Iranian government employed lethal tactics to shut them down. And the dead bodies were apparently confiscated from morgues, and in order to cover up how many deaths there'd actually been. So there was quite a harsh crackdown on these protests to quell them. I think the government felt quite threatened. Sources say there were about 1,000 of the protesters were killed, quite high numbers, really. Now, the protesters responded back to that with violence, in which 731 government banks were destroyed. In some cases, they said that these were false flags, where the government was destroying the banks as a pretext to cracking down harder on the protesters, and in being able to just say that the protesters were thugs and arsonists and whatnot. Protesters also attacked 50 military bases. Now, do you notice we never heard any of this news in the West, where they like to portray this as a very stable government and where people are generally very happy and very in love with their leaders, And as far as all these the funeral and everything that's going on in Iran at the moment, well, we see that with North Korea, don't we? When anything's going on, there's loads of people, waving their flags, whatnot. It's not hard in these regimes to get big crowds out to send a strong message of solidarity to the outside world. But is that what's really going on? So a lot of people said these were the most severe protests in Iran since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Now, because when I did my prediction last year, I said because the Saturn-Pluto conjunction was happening in kind of 1982, when this Islamic Republic was really doing its cultural revolution in terms of really transforming Iran into what it is today, the Islamic Republic. That was during the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. But now the Saturn-Pluto conjunctions happen again. I feel this could lead to a reversal. So after the government's violence, protesters were blocking streets, blocking highways. They were burning pictures of the supreme leader. As you can see, this is what I'm talking about here when I said about solar arc sun opposite Uranus in Scorpio in the 4th. You can just feel the surge in rebellion. People are very restless. They've kind of had enough. They're looking for something new. Protests were also expressing a lot of discontent with the Iranian government's spending. So because the economy has just been flatlining in Iran, both due to the sanctions and because they are spending so much money on funding terrorism, funding Hezbollah and all these wars, it's creating discontent in Iran. I mean, the money could be better spent, right? I also feel that there have been protests against Hezbollah in Lebanon because of corruption. And in the Iranian-controlled parts of Iraq, there have also been protests against corruption. So the people Iran sponsor around the Middle East are also beginning to lose their grip and their credibility because people are upset with the corruption, never mind all the other things that are going on. So there's a weakening of the allies of Iran, and there's a weakening internally. So a lot of protesters were actually chanting for the return of the Shah's son, who's Reza, and so people are harking back there to that era. So, of course, the supreme leader, Khameni, he authorized the use of deadly weapons against the protesters. And also in situations like this, where there's what we would call martial law in Iran, they bring in the IRG, the Iranian National Guard, which was Soleimani head, and they come down particularly hard on protesters. So I don't see that everyone there is devastated that Soleimani is gone either, although I'm sure they'd want us to believe that. The protesters, of course, were called thugs. And the Iranians blamed foreign interference for agitating. Well, I do think that the Americans are agitating. I think they sense this regime is weaker. And of course, they've played a role through the sanctions in making them weaker. So on the 16th of November, the Iranian government shut down the internet for 24 hours. And by November the 20th, connectivity was only 5% of its ordinary level. So in order to stop these protests and stop news getting out, they actually shut down the internet. That's what I was meaning here when I said about Saturn controlling planet, which is in Virgo for Iran, moving solar arc to conjunct Pluto in the house of communications. They're kind of trying to shut down the way people talk, communicate, because, I mean, that was key to the fall of the Soviet Union, really, people communicating via the fax machine. So communication, they know, it's definitely an ally of the protesters. As we know, virtually no media coverage. So what about Iran? Now, I don't think Iran is ever going to dissolve in the same way. There's just too much at stake for the West. For example, I mean, the USA has used Iran as a bogeyman in order to sell trillions of dollars worth of weapons to the other people in the region. That, I think, could actually change. I mean, as far as Trump being a warmonger, not at all. I don't think it's not a moral thing with him. I think from a business sense, he realizes wars just don't create profit. They're not a good use of money. They're a total sink in dollars. So what about Russia? Well, it's certainly Khameni and his others are key allies to Russia. I mean, many of the Ayatollahs studied in Moscow at the Patrice Lumumba University, and that was pre the 1979 revolution. And most of the Revolutionary Guard generals are actually Russian agents. I mean, Iran has always done Russia's bidding in the region. Economically, Russia is involved in nearly all their industries, particularly their heavy industries, and it's dumped billions of dollars worth of weaponry in Iran. So Russia is definitely a key ally there. Nothing can be done there with Russia, such a strong ally. That's why I say it's not going to dissolve into anything. It's not Iraq. It's not Libya. They're going to subtly change things. But I don't even think this new government, which could be slightly more progressive and more democratic and allow more freedom, it's not going to be a massive change. It's an improvement and definitely a softening of relations towards America, but not a dramatic change. So Russia's also helped Iran spend billions on their out-of-date nuclear power station. China is the main oil customer of Iran. They've been buying cheap oil, which is way under the market value from Iran in terms for a lot of low quality industrial and consumer equipment, machinery and goods. I mean, they sell a lot of things into Iran. China is their key trading partner, other than Germany. Now, it's underestimated. Germany is really a big ally of Iran. They're their biggest trading partner next to China. There are some theories going back that the German race actually originated in an area of Iran, and in biblical prophecy they refer to Germany as Assyria, which is a kind of nod to their links in part of Iran way back in history. So in terms of Turkey, they sell cheap oil. They buy cheap oil and gas from Iran as a conduit for gold and currency. They also are going against the sanctions. They're freely trading with Iran in contra to the sanctions. And they also are a haven for the monies, legitimate and otherwise, of the Iranian regime. They launder their money for them. All the Gulf states, particularly Dubai, are also conduits for money changing, transshipments of imports, exports, regime investments, etc., etc. Israel has grown a lot stronger because of the chaos the Iranian regime has generated in the region. So people are so focused on Iran, sometimes a bit of a get out of jail free card for Israel, so it's convenient for them as well. In terms of France in total control of Iran's car industry. So it would be very detrimental for France. That's why you see France and Germany are so keen on this Iran nuclear deal. They've got a lot to lose if there are changes in Iran because they're benefiting at the moment. And I think almost Trump wanting to disrupt things in Iran is also kind of this whole trade war, make America great, weaken Germany, it's part of a whole political chessboard. Then we have in Britain, how we related to Iran. Well, they say, according to this, there's a famous saying in Iran that if you shave a mullah's beard, you'll find a Union Jack underneath. Well, I don't know. I didn't make that up myself. But the Iran Oil Company still operates out of London, and London is a hub for the regime and their investments. Then you've also got all those satellite countries around Iran that were formerly part of the Persian Empire: Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Armenia, Azerbaijan. They all key allies, and Iran would be keen to establish control in those areas, or influence or dominance even in those areas again. So Iraq, Iraq forgave Iran $152 billion in terms of war reparations, and billions has also been invested in Iraq. I mean, the problems in Iraq certainly strengthened Iran going back to 2003 because the infrastructure in Iraq was wiped out. So it meant that oil companies, water companies in Iran had to step in to provide electricity, water, all those things. So their utility companies made a lot of profit. I'm guessing most of those are state-owned. So let's see what happens. So to sum up what I'm saying about Iran, I think there will be changes, but it's not going to be on the radical end. I think there will be a change in leader because of Uranus on the midheaven and because of Jupiter conjuncting Saturn. And I think it'll be a slightly more progressive leader who is going to be more amenable to America. And I think that could be very good for the economy because the sanctions might end. It'll bring more investment in. As was said by Jeremy Hunt, getting rid of Soleimani could help usher in a less confrontational Iran, maybe stopping things like in Yemen, which it would be great if this proxy war in Yemen was stopped. So it'd be interesting to see what's going to happen, but I definitely don't feel there's going to be all-out war, and definitely not a direct retaliation. Although because of the Jupiter in Capricorn and all the similarities when Jupiter was in Capricorn last to various acts of terrorism around the world, or flight hijackings, or like the incident where the British policewoman was shot outside the Iranian embassy, there will be something because certain elements will want to advance their own agendas by doing maybe some attacks from sleeper cells. But I don't think there'll be anything dramatic. And America, I think, is going to focus on continuing the internal aggravation to kind of drum up protests. And bearing in mind Soleimani as head of the IRG, Iranian Revolutionary Guard, once he's taken away, maybe the protesters will not be suppressed with the ruthlessness that was currently happening, which could mean that they could be more effective and they could grow. Maybe parts of Iranian society might be emboldened by the fact that he's not there anymore, and they might be ready to take on the person who's come after him, his successor, to just kind of test his successor and see their mettle and see how far they can push it. So great. I'll just read. Danny the Kidnapper, remove. Don't know what you're saying there, Glad. Good to see an astrologer not jumping on the anti-Trump bandwagon. No, Mark, we never do this on this channel. We kind of more Trump fans because we are not fans of globalism on this channel. So I don't like to jump on that bandwagon. I think generally he's an anti-war president who would have done far more good. I think without him we'd be at war in Syria now because Hillary wanted a no-fly zone, which would have been a direct confrontation with Russia. I don't think that's good. Yeah, Mark, I am always fair to Trump, definitely. Thanks, Brenda. Okay, Iranians are Indo-European, I believe. Yeah, Mark, I think there's something in it. I could do a little more about that once, but I don't know if it's that exciting for in terms of astrology. Hi, Third Eye. Oh, hi from Texas. Brilliant to have you. Jonathan, sorry I haven't commented more on your videos. Thank you for the Iran update. You were spot on about the election result. I was shocked that Labour, yes, I did say they were going to hold on to Warwick and Leamington. What is going on in that town? I don't understand them at all. You're spot on, Lisa. Pamela, I hope I am. Let's just see how it goes with this prediction. But I feel fairly confident with it. Thanks, Steph. Guys, I've got a lot of comments. Thank you very much. I hope you all enjoyed my Australian bushfires podcast. And I'll just take time to say I'm sorry about the podcasts, but sometimes I've been very busy with my writing. So it's easy to just flick on. I think it was it Lobi Dossa who said, I'm sitting here doing those podcasts in my nightgown. I don't want to dress up. Yeah, well, partially, why not? Hey, we've all done that. I've got a prediction coming on Brexit. And I've also got a prediction coming on the UK. How successful will Boris be? I'm going to do a prediction on Bernie Sanders because, little tidbit, I do think Bernie Sanders is going to be the one who runs against Trump. His chart definitely looks like it. And I see George Galloway was also predicting it. So it's going to be Bernie Sanders versus Trump. But bearing in mind, Bernie's going to be 80 in his first term, should he win, which I don't think he will. It's really going to be key who he picks as vice, because really people are actually voting for that vice president to be president, aren't they? Because an 80-year-old, well, I mean, anything could happen. So, but I think it's going to be Bernie. I've been looking at the charts of all the Labour runners. I'm pretty sure it's not Keir Starmer, who's a Virgo. Rebecca Long Bailey is also a Virgo. I'm just not liking her for it. I don't see it. I thought Jess Phillips, who's Libra, had the best chance. Funnily enough, I thought Lisa Nandy had a good outside chance. Although, look, politically, it doesn't seem like that could happen. And Jess, I think she's done too much on Twitter to damage herself in order to be leader. But you never know. She's a strong contender. And I think Lisa Nandy, I've forgotten her star sign now, but I'll be looking at those. Emily Thornberry, I'm pretty sure is Leo, but I'm ruling her out at this stage. Kevin, as an American, I'm ashamed of my own damn government right now. We have enough internal problems. Pull forces. Yeah, but do you see they are pulling them? They've agreed. Iraq has said they must get out now. So Trump's going to get his way and get forces out of Iraq, which would have been difficult for him to do had they not sort of been told to leave. I think this is what Trump does best. He escalates, but then the whole what would you say? He escalates things in order to create an avenue for a whole new path to open up. And I think that's what he's done. I remember a lot of us were really upset when they had those bombings in Douma, which we all thought was a false flag. And he went and bombed Syria. But really, it didn't harm. And in the end, things kind of worked out, didn't they? So I think what he's doing here is escalating. He's getting rid of a key problem. I think Soleimani is backing this Khameni out. Without Soleimani, Khameni might be a lot easier to deal with, or it might just rattle the cage. It might help them in Iran to just install a new regime, which will be much easier for America to deal with. And look, even Jeremy Hunt thinks, and for once I agree with him, that removing this guy could certainly help help restore peace, because he is an aggravating factor, isn't he? Lisa Nandy is a Sun Leo. Yeah, I'm quite keen on her. Damn girl, you're fine. Thanks again. Thanks, Guy. Thanks, TBR. Agreed. Thank you, everyone. These are brilliant comments. I hope I got... let them fight it out amongst themselves. Let us keep out of it. Well, basically, I agree with that. We should keep out of it. That region isn't going to change, and we're not going to turn it into a democracy. The best thing we can do is keep away from it. But at the moment, I don't know if that's always possible, because they're aggravating. With Labour leadership, we can support none of the above. Yeah, no, I mean, I think Labour are going to continue to get more and more radical, and they'll be out of power for a good long while. But I have some more stuff coming on that. So I think that's enough teasers. I'm going to end the stream now. Thank you to everyone who joined me, and thank you for bearing with me with the podcasts. And so Happy New Year to everyone on my channel. Thank you for the fantastic comments I've had from so many of you, and all the thumbs up and all the marvelous feedback. Always hoping to do more of these, time permitting. Lisa, what's your favorite? What, you mean my favorite planetary position, Danny? I'm going to say it's Sun sextile Jupiter. Okay, good comment, huh?